The morning sun cut through the fog hanging over Camp Redstone like a blade through silk. Lieutenant Maya Chen stood in formation with the other new arrivals, her posture deliberately relaxed, her expression carefully neutral. Around her, fresh-faced recruits fidgeted nervously, their eyes darting toward the imposing figures of the drill instructors who prowled the parade ground like wolves assessing prey. She had done this before, more times than she cared to count, but this time was different. This time she was here incognito, part of a special evaluation program designed to assess training protocols from the ground up. The recruits didn't know. The drill instructors didn't know. Only 3 people on the entire base knew her real identity, and they had been sworn to absolute secrecy. Listen up. The voice belonged to Sergeant Davis, a barrel-chested man whose voice could strip paint from walls. You are nothing. You know nothing. Everything you think you know, forget it. You're starting from zero. Maya allowed herself the smallest of smiles. She'd heard variations of this speech from Fort Benning to Kandahar, from training camps to forward operating bases. The words changed, but the sentiment remained constant. Break them down, build them up, forge them into something stronger. You there. Sergeant Davis was suddenly in front of her, his face inches from hers. Something funny, recruit? No, Sergeant, Maya replied, her voice level, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Then wipe that smirk off your face before I wipe it off for you. Yes, Sergeant. He moved on, and Maya felt the recruit beside her, a gangly young man who couldn't have been more than 19, release a breath he'd been holding. That was close, he whispered. Maya said nothing. The first rule of going unnoticed was to avoid drawing attention. The second rule was to perform adequately but not exceptionally. Too poor, and you'd be singled out for punishment. Too good, and you'd be singled out for scrutiny. The sweet spot was perfectly, unremarkably average. Over the next week, Maya maintained that delicate balance. During physical training, she finished in the middle of the pack, fast enough to avoid remedial sessions, slow enough to blend in. During weapons familiarization, she handled the rifles with careful hesitation, asking basic questions she could have answered in her sleep. During tactical exercises, she made the kinds of mistakes a genuine beginner would make, hesitating at decision points, second-guessing her movements, occasionally looking to others for guidance. The other recruits accepted her without question. To them, she was just another newcomer trying to survive basic training. A few of the more confident ones even tried to help her, offering tips on everything from boot maintenance to the best way to clean a rifle. Maya accepted their advice graciously, even when it contradicted years of her own hard-won experience. You're doing fine, said Recruit Johnson, the young man who'd stood beside her that first day. He'd appointed himself her unofficial mentor, a role she found both touching and mildly amusing. The first couple weeks are always the hardest. It gets easier. Thanks, Maya replied, lacing up her boots for the morning run. I appreciate it. No problem. We've got to stick together, right? That's what they keep telling us anyway. He wasn't wrong. The instructors hammered home the importance of unit cohesion at every opportunity. Individual achievement meant nothing if it came at the expense of the team. Maya had lived that truth in ways these recruits couldn't yet imagine, had seen how a single soldier's mistake could cascade into disaster, how trust and coordination could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The second week brought more intensive training, hand-to-hand combat, advanced weapon systems, tactical coordination. Maya continued her careful performance, absorbing the instruction as if hearing it for the first time, making progress at a believable rate. She took hits during sparring that she could have avoided, fumbled with equipment she could have operated blindfolded, asked questions whose answers she'd known for years. It was exhausting in a way that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Every instinct, every reflex honed over years of training and combat experience had to be suppressed, filtered, diluted. She was a concert pianist playing chopsticks, a master chef making toast, a surgeon performing first aid. The restraint required was nearly painful, but the evaluation demanded authenticity, and authenticity required commitment. How could she accurately assess the training program if she approached it as an expert, rather than a novice? How could she identify gaps and weaknesses if she compensated for them with her own knowledge? No, she had to experience it as these recruits experienced it. Frustration, confusion, gradual understanding, and all. The third week began with a surprise inspection. The recruits scrambled to prepare their bunks, their lockers, their equipment. Maya made her bed with the same careful precision as the others, ensuring hospital corners and regulation tautness. She arranged her gear according to the checklist they'd been given, double-checking placements and orientations. Sergeant Davis moved through the barracks like a tornado, finding fault with nearly every presentation. Bunks were torn apart, lockers upended, gear scattered. When he reached Maya's station, he paused. She held her breath, wondering if she'd unconsciously arranged things according to a different standard, some protocol from her actual rank and experience. But Davis simply grunted and moved on. Her presentation was acceptable. Not perfect, but acceptable. Exactly what it should be. That afternoon brought a new instructor, one Maya hadn't seen before. He stood at the front of the classroom where they'd gathered for a tactical briefing, his back to them as he examined a map on the wall. When he turned around, Maya's carefully maintained composure nearly cracked. The left side of his face was a roadmap of scar tissue, the result of burns that had clearly been severe. His left eye was clouded, probably partially blind, but his right eye was sharp and clear, and as his gaze swept across the assembled recruits, it held an intensity that made several of them shift uncomfortably. Maya knew those scars. She knew that eye. She knew this man, Captain James Morrison. They'd served together in Afghanistan, had weathered the same ambush that had left him scarred, and her with a Purple Heart and a promotion. He'd been one of the 3 people informed of her real identity and purpose at Camp Redstone. "Good afternoon," Morrison said, his voice gravelly but strong. "I'll be covering advanced tactical scenarios with you for the next 2 weeks. What we'll be discussing is based on real-world situations. Situations where people made mistakes and people died." He let that sink in, watching the recruits' faces sober. "The objective isn't to scare you," he continued. "It's to prepare you, to make you think, to help you understand that every decision has consequences, and in the field, those consequences can be measured in lives." For the next hour, Morrison walked them through a scenario involving a convoy ambush. He laid out the situation piece by piece: terrain, enemy positions, available resources, communication challenges. Then he asked them what they would do. The recruits offered suggestions, tentative at first, then more confident. Morrison listened to each one, neither praising nor condemning, simply asking follow-up questions that exposed assumptions and revealed gaps in their thinking. Maya remained silent, fighting the urge to contribute. She'd been in this exact scenario, or close enough that the differences didn't matter. She knew what worked and what didn't, knew the mistakes that could be avoided and the ones that were unavoidable. But revealing that knowledge would shatter her cover. "You," Morrison said, pointing directly at her. "You've been quiet. What do you think?" Every eye in the room turned to her. Maya's mind raced. She couldn't give the expert response, but she couldn't give a foolish one either. Morrison would know she was sandbagging, and that might compromise the entire evaluation. "I think," she said slowly, "that there's no perfect answer. Every choice has risks. The convoy commander has to weigh those risks against the mission objectives and make the best decision they can with the information available." It was a safe answer, deliberately vague, the kind of response a thoughtful recruit might give when confronted with complexity beyond their current understanding. Morrison's scarred face remained impassive. "That's true, but it's also unhelpful. In the moment, you can't afford to hedge. You have to decide. So decide." Maya felt the pressure mounting. She chose what seemed like a reasonable middle ground, based on the information Morrison had provided, suggesting a tactical withdrawal to a more defensible position before attempting to engage the ambush. "Interesting," Morrison said. "That might work, or it might get everyone killed when the enemy exploits your retreat to cut off your escape route. Anyone else?" The discussion continued, but Maya felt Morrison's eye on her periodically throughout the remainder of the session. She couldn't tell if he was suspicious or simply making sure she wasn't revealing herself. Either way, it made her uncomfortable. The 4th week brought field exercises. The recruits were divided into squads and sent into the wooded training area surrounding Camp Redstone with specific objectives: secure designated positions, conduct reconnaissance, execute simulated raids. Maya found herself appointed as her squad's communications specialist, a role that allowed her to contribute without taking command. They fumbled through the exercises, making the predictable mistakes of inexperience: poor noise discipline, inadequate spacing, inefficient movement. Maya bit her tongue as they walked into obvious ambush positions and failed to maintain proper security. The opposing force, played by more advanced trainees, exploited every error ruthlessly. "We're terrible at this," Johnson groaned after their third consecutive failure. "We're learning," Maya reminded him. "That's the point. Easy for you to say. You didn't lead us straight into that ambush." Actually, she'd tried to prevent it, suggesting an alternate route that would have avoided the obvious kill zone. But the squad leader had overruled her. Confident in his own assessment, she could have pressed the point, could have made her reasoning clear, but that would have meant stepping out of her role. The fifth week began with an announcement. They would be conducting a major training exercise involving all the recruit companies, a multi-day operation in the field designed to test everything they'd learned. The scenario involved securing and defending a strategic position against a numerically superior opposing force. Maya's company was assigned a defensive position on high ground overlooking a valley. They had 2 days to prepare before the exercise began. The recruits threw themselves into the work, digging fighting positions, establishing fields of fire, creating obstacles and barriers. Maya worked alongside them, but her mind was elsewhere, cataloging the deficiencies she observed. The fighting positions were too shallow, the fields of fire too narrow, the defensive plan too rigid. They'd arranged themselves according to the textbook without accounting for the specific terrain or likely enemy approaches. When, not if, they were overrun, it would be a valuable lesson. A painful one, but valuable. On the night before the exercise began, Captain Morrison appeared at their position. He walked the perimeter with the company commander, a lieutenant fresh from officer training who radiated nervous energy. Maya watched from her position, curious what Morrison might say. The captain's tour was thorough, but his comments were minimal. He asked questions rather than giving directives, forcing the lieutenant to articulate and defend his defensive plan. It was a teaching method Maya had used herself many times, the Socratic approach, revealing weaknesses through inquiry rather than criticism. As Morrison passed near her position, his good eye flicked in her direction for just a moment. Then he moved on without comment. The exercise began at dawn. The opposing force probed the defenses cautiously at first, testing responses and identifying weaknesses. Maya's company held firm, repelling the initial contacts with sustained fire. The recruits were excited, energized by their apparent success. But Maya knew better. The real assault hadn't begun. The opposing force was still gathering intelligence, still formulating their plan. When they came in earnest, it would be overwhelming and precisely targeted. The attack came at dusk, just as visibility dropped and fatigue set in. The opposing force hit them from 3 directions simultaneously, focusing combat power on the weakest points in the defensive line. Maya's company fought hard, but they were outmaneuvered and outfought. Within an hour, their position was overrun and the exercise was called. The recruits were devastated. Some were angry, others dejected, a few near tears. They'd worked so hard, prepared so thoroughly, and still been defeated. The lesson landed with crushing weight. The after-action review took place the next morning. The company assembled in the field, their defensive position still evident around them. Captain Morrison conducted the review, walking them through every phase of the battle, every decision point, every mistake. "You did a lot of things right," he told them. "Your initial preparation was solid, your fire discipline was good, your communication was adequate, but you made some critical errors." He enumerated them. Failure to secure the high ground to their west, inadequate observation posts, predictable defensive patterns, insufficient reserves to respond to breakthroughs. Each point landed like a hammer blow. "But," Morrison continued, "the biggest mistake wasn't tactical. It was intellectual. You stopped thinking. You created a plan and then rigidly adhered to it even when circumstances changed. You let doctrine replace judgment." He paused, scanning the assembled recruits. "Real combat isn't scripted. The enemy doesn't follow your plan. The terrain doesn't cooperate. Equipment fails. People make mistakes. The ability to adapt, to think on your feet, to make decisions under pressure with incomplete information, that's what separates soldiers from casualties." The words hung in the air. Maya found herself nodding unconsciously, then caught herself. But Morrison had seen the movement. His eye locked onto her. "Recruit Chen," he said. "Come here." Maya's heart skipped. She stood and approached, her mind racing. What was he doing? Morrison gestured to the defensive position. If you had been in command, what would you have done differently? It was a trap. Answer as a recruit and she'd be giving Morrison's own teaching back to him looking presumptuous. Answer as a major and she'd blow her cover. She needed to thread the needle. She began, then stopped. Captain, I don't have the experience to. I'm not asking what you know, Morrison interrupted. I'm asking what you think. Based on everything you've learned over the past 5 weeks, what would you have done? It was permission, she realized. Permission to show a glimmer of what she really knew, framed as speculation rather than expertise. Morrison was giving her an out, a way to contribute to the training without completely compromising the evaluation. I would have worried about that high ground to the west, she said carefully. It seemed like a vulnerability. Why? Because it overlooks our position. If I were attacking us, that's where I'd want to be. So what would you have done about it? Secured it or at least kept it under observation? Maybe positioned a squad there or sent regular patrols to make sure it stayed clear. Morrison nodded. Good. What else? Maya felt the other recruits watching her. She'd already said more than was comfortable, but Morrison was pushing. The defensive plan seemed very fixed. I kept thinking about what would happen if they didn't attack where we expected. We didn't seem to have a good way to respond to that. Meaning, we needed more flexibility, maybe smaller, more mobile teams instead of static positions, or reserves positioned where they could respond to threats from multiple directions. Are you saying the lieutenant's plan was wrong? It was a challenge testing how far she'd go. No, Captain. Just that there might have been alternatives worth considering. Morrison stared at her for a long moment. The scarred side of his face was impassive, but his good eye held something that might have been approval, or amusement, or both. The reason I'm pressing Recruit Chen, Morrison said, addressing the entire company now, is that she's demonstrating critical thinking. She's not just repeating what she's been taught. She's applying it, questioning it, extending it. That's what I want from all of you. He turned back to Maya. Thank you, recruit. Return to formation. As Maya walked back to her place, she felt Johnson staring at her. Where did that come from? He whispered. Just thinking out loud, she replied. That wasn't just thinking out loud. That was tactical analysis. Maya shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. The captain asked. I answered. The 6th week brought more advanced training. Night operations, urban combat scenarios, integrated fires coordination. Maya continued her performance, but she'd felt something shift after the exercise review. The other recruits looked at her differently now with a mixture of respect and curiosity. Some sought her opinions on tactical problems. Others seemed to resent her sudden visibility. She tried to fade back into the middle, to recapture her previous anonymity. But it was difficult. Morrison had pulled her into the light, if only briefly, and shadows were harder to find. The 7th week began with another surprise. A visit from the base commander, Colonel Sarah Reeves. She observed their training, asked questions, spoke with instructors and recruits alike. When she reached Maya's squad, she paused. Recruit Chen, she said. The instructors tell me you've shown good tactical instincts. I try, ma'am. Where are you from? Originally from California, ma'am. Bay Area. Family military? Yes, ma'am. Both parents served. It was true, though heavily edited. Both her parents had indeed served. Her father as a career Army officer who'd retired as a colonel, her mother as a military intelligence analyst. Maya had grown up on bases around the world, absorbing military culture from infancy. That explains some things, Reeves said. Carry on. When the colonel departed, Sergeant Davis approached Maya. You didn't mention your parents were military, he said. It didn't seem relevant, Sergeant. Everything's relevant, recruit. Your background, your motivation, your influences, it all matters. Yes, Sergeant. Davis studied her for a moment. You're doing well. Better than well. Keep it up. Maya felt the noose tightening. The more she excelled, the more attention she drew. The more attention she drew, the harder it became to maintain her evaluation objectives. She needed to recalibrate, to find a new equilibrium. But events were moving beyond her control. The 8th week brought the final major exercise. A complex operation involving multiple companies, combined arms coordination, and a scenario designed to push every recruit to their limits. Maya's company was tasked with conducting a raid on an enemy position, extracting valuable intelligence, and withdrawing before reinforcements could arrive. The operation began well. The approach was executed flawlessly, The assault was aggressive and coordinated. The objective was secured quickly. But during the withdrawal, things fell apart. The squad carrying the simulated intelligence, Johnson's squad, ran into an unexpected opposing force element and became pinned down. The company commander hesitated, uncertain whether to continue the withdrawal or attempt a rescue. Those few moments of indecision allowed the situation to deteriorate. More opposing force elements converged on Johnson's position. The exercise was on the verge of becoming a catastrophic failure. Maya watched from her position, every instinct screaming at her to act. She knew exactly what needed to be done. A flanking maneuver to relieve pressure, smoke to cover movement, concentrated fire to create an opening. She could see it all playing out in her mind with perfect clarity. But she held her position, held her tongue, maintained her cover. Because that was the mission. That was what she'd been sent here to do. Then she heard Johnson's voice over the radio, tight with fear. "We're getting torn apart here. We need help." Something inside Maya snapped. "This is Chen," she said into her radio. "I have an idea." "Chen, maintain radio discipline," the company commander began. "Listen to her." The voice was Captain Morrison's, suddenly on the command net. "Chen, what are you thinking?" Maya laid out her plan in crisp, clear terms. A diversionary assault from one direction to draw off opposing forces, followed by a flanking movement to extract Johnson's squad. It would require precise timing and aggressive execution, but it would work. "Do it," Morrison ordered. "Lieutenant, implement Chen's plan." The company commander, to his credit, didn't hesitate. He issued orders rapidly, repositioning squads and coordinating movements. Maya found herself leading the flanking element, her carefully maintained cover forgotten in the urgency of the moment. She moved through the woods with practiced efficiency, reading terrain and anticipating threats with an expertise that had nothing to do with 7 weeks of basic training. The squad followed her lead, responding to her hand signals and verbal commands with growing confidence. They hit the opposing force from an unexpected angle, creating enough confusion and pressure to allow Johnson's squad to break contact and withdraw. The extraction was successful, the intelligence was secured, and the company completed its withdrawal in good order. When they assembled for the after-action review, Captain Morrison stood at the front with an expression Maya couldn't quite read. The scarred side of his face was impassive as always, but his good eye held something that might have been satisfaction. "That," he said, "was a good example of adaptation under pressure. When the situation changed, you changed with it. When leadership hesitated, someone stepped up with a solution." He looked directly at Maya. Recruit Chen displayed excellent tactical judgment and decisive action. She identified the problem, formulated a solution, and communicated it clearly. Most importantly, she acted when action was needed. Morrison paused, and something shifted in his expression. Of course, that level of tactical sophistication is unusual in a recruit with only 7 weeks of training. Some might say it's exceptional. Some might even say it's improbable. Maya felt her stomach drop. This was it. Morrison was going to expose her right here, right now. Which raises the question, Morrison continued, of where such knowledge and skill might come from. The recruits were watching now, sensing something significant unfolding. Johnson stared at Maya with wide eyes. Even the company commander looked confused. Morrison took a step closer to Maya, his eye locked on hers. "Major Chen," he said quietly, "it's good to serve with you again." The silence that followed was absolute. 50 recruits stood frozen, processing what they'd just heard. "Major, not recruit. Major. You're a major?" Johnson finally managed. "Yes," Maya said quietly. There was no point in denying it now. "But why? Why are you here? Why pretend to be one of us?" Morrison answered before Maya could. "Major Chen is here conducting a special evaluation of our training program. To do that effectively, she needed to experience it as you experience it, without the instructors modifying their approach or the training adapting to her rank and expertise. So all of it was fake?" Another recruit, anger in his voice. "You were just playing pretend while we actually struggled?" "No," Maya said firmly. "I was learning, just like you. I was learning whether this program adequately prepares soldiers for what they'll face, whether the training is realistic and relevant, whether the instruction is effective. I couldn't learn that as a major conducting an inspection. I had to learn it as a recruit going through the program." "Did we pass?" Johnson asked. "Your evaluation, I mean." Did we meet your standards? Maya looked at him, at all of them. These young soldiers who'd sweated and struggled and grown over the past 7 weeks. You exceeded them, she said honestly. The dedication, the resilience, the way you support each other, that's exactly what soldiers should be. What the program needs to work on is teaching you to think more flexibly, to question doctrine when circumstances demand it, to trust your own judgment. But as soldiers, you're going to be just fine. The company commander stepped forward. Permission to speak, ma'am? Granted, Lieutenant. Why reveal yourself now? You still had another week of training. It was Morrison who answered. Because sometimes the evaluation has to end early. Because watching someone with Major Chen's capabilities deliberately underperform when soldiers needed her expertise would have been wasting a valuable resource. And because, he looked at Maya with something that might have been respect, she was willing to blow her cover to help her fellow soldiers, which tells me everything I need to know about her character, and frankly, everything I need to know about whether this program is teaching the right values. Over the next few hours, the revelation settled in. Some recruits approached Maya with questions about her experience, her career, what combat was really like. Others kept their distance, perhaps feeling betrayed by the deception. Maya answered questions honestly when asked, but didn't volunteer information. She was still finding her footing in this new dynamic. That evening, Morrison found her sitting alone near the barracks writing notes for her evaluation report. That got complicated, he said, lowering himself onto the bench beside her. You could say that. I'm sorry I forced your hand, but I watched you during that exercise. You were tearing yourself apart trying to maintain cover while soldiers needed help. I couldn't let you do that to yourself. Maya set down her pen. Was it that obvious? To me? Yes. I know you, Chen. I know what it costs you to hold back, and I know you would have maintained that cover all the way through if I hadn't intervened. That was the mission. The mission was to evaluate training, not to torture yourself or risk soldiers for the sake of paperwork. They sat in silence for a moment watching the sun set over Camp Redstone. I learned a lot, Maya said finally. More than I expected. The program is good, Morrison. Really good. But we can make it better. That's why you're here. The recruits, they're angry. Some of them anyway. They'll get over it. And some of them learned more from discovering who you really are than they learned from all the previous weeks combined. Johnson, for instance. I heard him telling his squad that if he works hard and stays dedicated, maybe someday he'll be a major like you. Maya smiled. That kid's going to do just fine. Because of what you taught him. Not just the tactics, the attitude, the way you carried yourself, the way you treated others, the way you kept pushing even when things were hard. That's what he'll remember. Morrison stood, grimacing slightly as his scarred side pulled tight. For what it's worth, Chen, I'm glad you're here. Not just for the evaluation. It's good to serve with you again. You too, Captain. After he left, Maya returned to her notes, but her mind wandered to the past 7 weeks, to the recruits she'd trained alongside, to the lessons learned and the mistakes made. She thought about Johnson and his earnest determination, about the company commander who'd trusted her judgment in a crisis, about the drill instructors who'd pushed them all to be better than they thought they could be. The evaluation would show areas for improvement. She'd identified dozens of them. But it would also show a fundamentally sound program producing fundamentally sound soldiers. Men and women who worked together, who adapted to challenges, who persevered through difficulty. And maybe, just maybe, she'd helped make them a little bit better. Not as a major giving orders, but as a fellow recruit struggling through the same challenges, offering a helping hand when needed, learning alongside them. Sometimes the best lessons came from unexpected teachers. Sometimes the best teachers were the ones who led by example rather than by rank. Maya picked up her pen and continued writing. She had a lot to say, and only 3 more days to say it. The evaluation would be thorough, detailed, and honest, just like everything else she'd done over the past 7 weeks. Even if some of it had been under false pretenses, the truth of it remained. They were all soldiers, all servants of something larger than themselves, all trying to be worthy of the uniform they wore and the trust placed in them. And in the end, that was what mattered most.